Hey, welcome to Caritas Querens. So, in this series of videos, I'm taking a look at my own spiritual journey towards not hopeful, confident universalism. And the last thing I was talking about was how I finally began to see universal salvation as theologically feasible, as something that actually made sense of the Bible, made sense of everything I believed, and the theology that I had been taught, made sense of morality, made sense of just about everything that had been handed down to me in the faith. um, and but and I also saw it, by the way, as desirable. I thought this is beautiful. This would be wonderful if this was true. And if it is true, then it puts to rest all the concerns, all the disillusionment, all the disturbance that I'd been experiencing because of predestination and the thought that God might either choose some people to be damned or at least permit them to be damned, not give them what they need to be, to be saved, and thereby basically indirectly damning them. All of that was resolved if only nobody was eternally damned. But again, that's where my background as a Catholic came into play. So at this point, I should mention if you're not a Catholic, you might not be able to relate to this part as much. I don't know. But I need to explain a little bit about my background as a Catholic, what I believe, what Catholics believe. Maybe you can relate. If you're a member of, an established denomination, I mean, like the Catholic Church, a lot of other Protestant denominations, for instance, reject universal salvation and teach endless hell. So you might find yourself in the same boat and think, how could I, as a name it, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Baptist, whatever, how could I be a Baptist and still accept universal salvation? So here's the thing: as a Catholic, I believe that Jesus Christ founded the Catholic Church, and in fact, that he did so to be his mystical body. That after he ascended to heaven, that he would remain with us primarily through the church. That the church is his mystical body, which means that basically the church is the continued presence of Jesus on this earth. So, in other words, when the church teaches, it is really Jesus teaching through the church. When the church does something, like, for instance, giving grace through the sacraments, it is really Jesus doing that through the church. I mean, that's why, for instance, as Catholics, we believe there's nothing wrong with confession, because really we believe that in confession, we are confessing to Jesus through the church, or I should say, confessing to the Father through the church, through Jesus, okay, the mystical body, his mystical body in the church, and that we are being pardoned by the Father through Christ in his mystical body, the church. Anyway, okay, so if that's true, then that means that the church is infallible. Infallible just means that the church cannot err in matters of faith and morals. The church cannot believe or teach any error regarding things of salvation. So if that's true, I thought to myself, okay, well, here's the issue. Doesn't the church teach eternal hell? And hasn't the church condemned universalism? So I started kind of, in the back of my mind, getting a little bit of anxiety, thinking, okay, I'm ready to accept universalism. In fact, I want to, but, does that mean I'm going to have to leave the Catholic Church or stay in the church, but basically reject some of the church's teaching, Um, and, I still really believed, and I still really do believe that the Catholic Church is the true church, that it is the mystical body of Christ. And so I didn't want to do that. So I had this conflict within myself of, wanting to be a faithful Catholic, and yet at the same time, wanting to believe something that I thought would not allow me to be a faithful Catholic. So I started wondering sometimes, when push comes to shove, am I going to be able to, to hold on to universalism? You know, can I leave the church and be faith and in order to believe this? Must I leave the church in order to believe this? I wasn't sure. I hadn't really worked it out, and I was getting a little worried about it. So if you're not a Catholic, again, I don't know if you can relate to that, but maybe again, in place of Catholic, maybe you could, substitute something else. Like maybe you've kind of wondered, well, all the other Presbyterians I know, they reject this. Can I still be a Presbyterian and yet believe universalism? Can I still be a Lutheran and embrace universalism? And so it was very difficult for me, especially because I didn't see out there, and in fact, I still don't see a lot out there about universalism from a Catholic perspective. Most of what I was reading was written by non Catholic Christians, either Orthodox or various denominations of Protestantism. And, I kind of thought it's not so much of an issue for them, like if I were a Lutheran, you know, I could say, well, I don't believe the Lutheran Church is infallible anyway. So, I could either say, I could say that, well, this is just an error. This is just an area where, the Lutheran Church just didn't quite get it right, or the Lutheran Church still has to change her teachings or something like that. Can't do that as a Catholic. I thought I don't have that liberty because again, I believe that the church is infallible. So whatever the church has taught, it's really Jesus teaching it. And that means that, if it was true 500 years ago, it's still true today. If it was true 1,000 years ago, it's still true today. So if the church teaches endless hell years ago, then the church still teaches it today. It's still true. If the church condemned universalism 1,500 years ago or so, then it's still condemned today. So here's what helped me in that regard. First of all, the whole idea of the church condemning universalism, a lot of that seems to be tied to, I think it's the Fourth Ecumenical Council and the condemnations of Origenism and Origen. Okay, and let me just put it very bluntly, there's a lot of sound historical criticism of this, that the church never really officially condemned universalism as a whole in any of these condemnations. If anything, at most, it seems like probably just the church condemned one particular form of universalism, or Origenism, which may have been condemning more specifically just because of some other teachings which really were errors. Okay, but a condemnation of one particular form of universalism does not necessarily imply a blanket wholesale condemnation of all forms of universalism. If you're interested in that, by the way, there's a really great article by Father Aidan Kimmel in his Eclectic Orthodoxy blog. I don't remember the name of it. It's something about like, did the Fourth Ecumenical Council really condemn universalism or something like that? But he goes through all that and explains it in great detail. So that cleared that up for me. I thought, okay, well, it's not dogmatically wholesale condemned. Okay, and that's also, by the way, that's also testified to by the fact that St. Gregory of Nyssa most definitely taught some form of universalism, and he is a canonized saint. He was also called the Father of Fathers at an ecumenical council, was held in very high esteem. So it'd be very hard to imagine that, he would be awarded all those honors, so to speak, if he taught a serious heresy that had been previously condemned, right? So anyway, but that still left the idea of, okay, the church obviously teaches eternal hell, right? And interestingly, at one point, I I had a conversation with this priest that I mentioned in one of my previous videos about my interest in universalism, and it was a great talk, great conversation. And afterwards, the priest, I got the impression that, and I don't want to speak for him, but this is my impression. I think that he really wanted to believe universalism, but he just thought, I can't. It's the church doesn't teach this. The church obviously teaches eternal hell. And afterwards, I was just like, like kind of frustrated a little bit, and eventually I thought I should just read what's in the Catechism. Go over it again, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the sections on hell, and just see what it says. And I thought, maybe it's not as straightforward as it sounds. Maybe I can take what the church teaches. Maybe I can interpret it in such a way that it actually, doesn't say that hell is endless, and therefore, I can harmonize universalism with the church's teaching on hell. It took me a while. I didn't want to read it, but eventually I did, and I just couldn't find any way around it. I basically, it was kind of obvious to me that the church pretty much clearly teaches that there is hell, but also that hell is endless. Um, and that was kind of troubling for me at first. Also, I realized, that the Catholic Church also teaches um, hell, purgatory, and heaven. And a lot of Universalists, a lot of non-Catholic Universalists, oftentimes will teach that there is hell, but they'll say that hell is basically temporary. So hell is basically, in their minds, basically like purgatory. So I thought, okay, that makes sense to me. But if that's the case, then why does the Catholic Church teach that hell and purgatory are two distinct possibilities? Like if hell is basically just kind of purgatory in disguise, then why distinguish between the two, right? So there was no way around it. In my mind, the church teaches endless hell. But then, in the midst of that, I thought, okay, why am I, as a Catholic, why am I trying to kind of twist what the church teaches into what I want it to mean? Why am I taking the teaching of the church, which I believe is really the teaching of Jesus Christ through his mystical body, right? Why am I taking that teaching and trying to make it say what I want it to say? Why don't I just accept it as what it is, okay, and see if there's not some way to harmonize it with universalism? If I really believe that universalism is true, and I believe that the teaching of the church is true, the truth can't contradict itself. There must be some harmony. There must be some synthesis, right? And so I developed, I very quickly after that, I was thinking about it and meditating on this, and I found pretty easily at least 4 ways that I could harmonize universalism with the church's teaching on endless hell. I'm not going to go into detail about those, by the way, because I've already made another video about them. If you're interested, it's a video called "Can a Catholic Be a Universalist?" And I go into more detail in that video about that whole issue. But anyway, I see that as kind of like the third stage in my journey towards confident universalism. When I got to the point, it was kind of a turning point when I realized, okay, I can harmonize universalism with the church's doctrine of endless hell. It doesn't have to be an exclusive either or, okay? And that was really exciting for me. But it also kind of led to a little bit of a crisis, or I was a little bit disturbed because I thought, the problem is, though, that, like, I'm just not seeing a lot of Catholics engaging with this idea. Everything I read pretty much about universalism is from a non-Catholic perspective, and it's basically, saying that there is no endless hell, that there is a hell, but it's temporary. And so I kind of felt this disconnect. I felt like, the majority of universalists say that hell is not endless. But the church teaches that hell is endless. And I think it's okay to believe both. But so how can I be kind of like have fellowship with other universalists, So that led eventually to what I will call my 4th stage in the development, in my journey towards confident universalism, when I began to see that not only is universalism harmonious with the doctrine of endless hell, but that the two are mutually enriching. And so more and more I began to see, I became more and more convinced, and began to see more and more, not only that it makes sense, that universalism makes sense, but that it really does seem to be the missing puzzle piece for that very reason, because putting it in to the whole picture of the rest of the faith, including eternal hell or endless hell, actually mutually enriches the doctrine of endless hell and the doctrine of universalism. So more about that in the next video. Until then, adios.